Hello, beautiful friends. My name is Alicia, and this is Ask Alicia and Friends, the live, or I guess the recorded edition. So the live edition is on third Wednesdays, 6 to 7 p.m. Pacific time. And that one's really fun because usually there's other folks there and it's a whole discussion and we have rotating topics. But in these in these recorded versions, uh, it's just me channeling spirits. There's different ones every time. And so our guest today calls herself Moonchild, and she is pretty snazzy because she is telling us that her essence is what we think of as feminine, but in her realm they don't have feminine and masculine, and that she operates at a much higher energy, and so she's not able to um, be with us fully, but she says she's going to come back in about 10 episodes and talk more. So if you like this one, you should definitely consider coming back. Before I forget, if you want to join the live discussion group, you want to go to calendly.com/rose composite, and then the regular website is roseco.co, and you can follow me on Instagram or Facebook with Ali Rose 359. So definitely check that stuff out. I'm always doing parties and one-on-one sessions and all kinds of fun things. So please, if you like this, if you resonate with my energy, reach out and we'll do an oracle reading. They're a lot of fun. And you can ask just about anything with spirit, right? We'll just channel your higher guides. So without further ado, Miss Moonchild, let me take a quick sip of water. She came to me first last night, and she so I live, it's pretty cloudy where I live all the time. It's in the Northwest, and pretty regularly I'll get these moments where it's like, you gotta go outside right now, go outside. And this happened twice yesterday, and both times there were these breaks in the clouds where you could see the moon so beautifully. It's right around the full moon. We're just a couple days around it. So it's super huge, super bright, so beautiful. Last one of the year. And I'm really excited to be able to share some of these messages because Moonchild is telling us that like her world is so vastly different. It's hard for us to even like comprehend and wrap our minds around it. There's no time, there's no space. Everything is just being. She says she's in the sixth dimension and that nobody has bodies. Everyone just kind of has these ethereal energies. And she keeps pointing at Lolita. I know we did the Lolita hummingbird episodes a couple times. Lolita's outside. She's floating around and wanting some attention. And so she just wants to really express a lot of gratitude. So Lolita, I think, is like full on a part of this journey now. She's going to be with us most days. And I don't know if you can see, my cat Monkey is in my lap as well. And Moonchild is coming in too, saying that she's another one of these guys that is with us consistently, kind of coming in and out. Lolita really wants to just give you guys a little moment of brightness. So since we recorded that episode, my cat Monkey has not gone on the porch at all. Monkey is like a no porch cat now, and he used to love the porch. And it is colder, we're well into winter now. But Lolita's been coming on the porch a lot, and she tells me that like that's her space now. Like Monkey is not allowed. So I'll definitely let you know what's up with that. But she has been definitely coming closer, hanging out more, being more involved on a spiritual level. And Monkey's my man. Monkey has been there for a long time with that support. So it's kind of fun because she's saying that Monkey does. Ooh, that's really cool. So Monkey does like the earth stuff. And she's saying Lolita does the air stuff and Moonchild does, she's calling it space stuff, but she's kind of saying like the spirit, what we would call the spiritual realms. That's not quite a good translation. And so as we go through this, please just know that some of the words that I'm channeling from Moonchild, we just don't have in the English language. So I'll do my best to use the vocabulary I have to explain it and get the message across. If you're feeling things in your body while we're talking, if you are getting sensations, sometimes it can feel, I like to call it sparkly, but there's this like electrifying energy that you can feel sometimes. And Moonchild just wants to remind you that that is these energetic downloads that you're getting, these activations that you're getting, and that if you're feeling that, really lean into it. And what I mean by that is just like take a breath, take a moment, and allow yourself to experience that and to acknowledge that. And that's kind of what will help to build in your own practice, because so much of this is simply learning information in a different way. You know, so much of our typical way of learning is either watching someone else do it, or reading a book about it, or listening to a lecture and learning in that way. This way is really energetically supplanting knowledge within us from a cellular level, where we instantly know it without that explanation of how we learned it. And so this also, because Moonchild's really explaining it in a couple ways, that's for like future skills. But what's really cool is because time doesn't work, or not time doesn't work, but time just doesn't really exist. It's not a confined of that dimension. And so what can also happen is if we've had past lives where we had mastered skills in the past, we are able to tap into that past life and bring those skills in to our current life and use those skills as if we have, you know, if you studied as a yogini for 85 years in another life, you can tap into that knowledge in this current life without having to spend all that time doing that, because as a soul, on that soul level, on that energetic level, you already have spent that time accomplishing that knowledge, accomplishing those skills. And yeah, that's just beautiful. What else you got? Okay, Lolita's good. We don't have anything else from her. It's Moonchild's turn. So some of the things that Moonchild really wanted to talk about were dimensional travel. And I want you to understand that we live in a realm that is confined by time and space. And so part of what that means is that sometimes we need to wait for the right circumstances to line up for us to be able to access that knowledge from other realms. It's not something that we always have access to 100% of the time. So sometimes that's the circumstances, sometimes that's the right time. And that can also be related to place as well, right? And so we're really speaking to both the time and the place in this conjunction, as well as those right circumstances. And what's so important about that is in seeing in something like ley lines, right? If you're familiar with ley lines or crystal grids around the universe, these are kind of networks and sometimes called matrices of connections. And so one of the, I think, most present that we're aware of is if you look at the ancient pyramids around the world, they're like connecting with different star systems. They're connecting with each other in different ways. There's a lot of obelisks as well, which are thought to be almost like the same way that we have our electric grid system, our electricity system. There are these energetic systems that can channel information between them. And so if you are aligned with those, you're able to have a stronger signal to that information. So that's where if you are further away from them, something either has to be like really targeted towards you. And what I mean by targeted is like you are connected emotionally in some way to that, or you are needing that information to fulfill your purpose. Like that is a specific message for you, yourself specifically, right? Whereas if it's more general, it might be a more uh, a message for kind of the masses, or a more general message about what is going on with the collective. And I'm smiling. They it I wish I had better words to explain it, so maybe they can help me with that. But these birds, they fly around, and I only look out the windows, right? You know, the way my apartment's set up, there's only windows on this half of the room. But it really looks like they're flying in circles around, and it could certainly just be a large flock that, you know, keeps going. Um, but so I'm reminded of that saying to like stay in the eye of the storm, right? Especially when you are into different dimensions. Oftentimes it's uh, I think especially with women, but in general, we want to please our society, we want to please our families, we want to, you know, get along with those around us. And what's really important is when you move into some of these different dimensions energetically, I want you to shift that thinking, because in those other dimensions, it's so important for you to have a real clear boundary of your identity and who you are, possibly where you're going if you know that. But whatever kind of exploration you do, you want to have a very clear idea of where you're returning to. Because if you don't have these clear boundaries of where you're coming back to and who you are and what your identity is, what you like and don't like, why you're there, what your purpose is, where you're going, where you're coming back to, what can happen is that you can kind of get lost in the ocean of consciousness. And what I mean by that is that, and I want to give a caveat to this as well. Sometimes the purpose of why we go into these higher realms and into these more energetic spaces of all oneness, and you can almost think of it as being one bird in a large flock, right? From far away, you know, I can't tell you one bird from the other. They all look like birds to me. But I can tell you, if I was in that flock, I would know that you're a different bird and I'm this bird, and your name's Fred and my name's Joe, and there's Susie over there, you know? And it's really important to have that, because you can, what I would call, get lost. You can get lost in all of it, and then find yourself in a different a dimension. And what I mean by that is a different time or space. And you can look into some of the recollections. There are stories of people getting lost in time, and also people just disappearing, and you know, the potential of what I would loosely call teleportation. So, whew. The caveat that I started to mention is that sometimes the purpose of why we're going into these spaces of all oneness and of all knowingness is that we are very intentionally releasing old patterns or old parts of ourself. And it's much easier to do that by and effectively what you're doing, it's an old yogic technique. It's thought to be a siddhi, and so siddhis, siddhi, are thought to be effectively superhuman powers that are developed when you spend long time of dedication to yogic practices. And the reason I say that so broadly is asana, the physical practice is one of those, the poses that you practice is one, but there's all these different branches. So you can study yogic philosophy, and that can be your path to this, right? There's so much more to yoga than just the physical practice, and I hope that the Western world is kind of waking up to that, because I would say predominantly it's non-physical. And at least in the practice that I studied, it's to ready the body for meditation. All of the physical practices to support the non-physical practice. So when you are traveling to these interdimensions, that just means between them, right? When you are traveling to other dimensions would be a better way to say that. Sometimes we do that in order to shift things in our current reality, right? This is a way where we can make changes, and realistically, theoretically, what is more accurate to be said is that we are shifting out and returning to a different dimension, a slightly different dimension. And so you can almost think of it as this like spectrum where there's for every single choice you make, there is a branch there, and there are two different dimensions into that, right? So for every single fork in the road, metaphorically, that you've come through, did you go to college? Did you choose to take a gap year? Did you have children? And think of it too, like, did you have one child? Did you have two child? Did you have three child? Did you have that when you were 23, 24, 25? There's so many different permutations. It's not just that there is these very clear forks in the road, yes or no, yes or no, yes or no. Oftentimes there's infinite possibilities for each one of these choices. And so you can kind of think of that too as like, do you get married, yes or no, is the choice. And realistically, marriage is such a human construct already. But on top of that is like, who did you marry, right? There's unlimited possibilities. So start to think of it more broadly. And that's where it's kind of, it takes time to wrap your human mind around this thought that there truly are infinite possibilities out there of all the different varieties of who you could be and how you could live your life. And that's where I want you to put those boundaries into place and really re-solidify that identity that you have, because you are all powerful in the sense that every choice you make is your decision. Even if you're choosing to follow what someone else is telling you, that's still your decision at the end of the day. So really be diligent in securing your own sovereignty and in retaining your own freedom by making your own choices step by step. And that more often than not is also aligned with what's good for other people. It's not like every single time you're like, no, I'm not going to do that because so-and-so said I should do this, or society told me I should do that. But it's about also following what I would call your right-mindedness, following your intuition, following your best judgment, even when it goes in opposition to either what those people around you who care about you say, your friends, your society, your culture, you name it, right? And I keep going back to this city. So one of the, and there's so many of them, but one of them is being able to shrink yourself to the size of a proton. And when you think about this really broadly, you're like, okay, like I got really small. Is this Alice in Wonderland? How helpful is that? But the reality is that in being able to shrink yourself so small, you are able to shift things so quickly at a very minute level, and then you're able to expand out again. And so the reason that this is so valuable is because it is much easier to make those small little changes at that finite level, and then watch them grow as you expand, right? Because it's in our human nature, it's in most nature to expand. That's what biology does. Biology expands. So definitely retain that sovereignty, retain that freedom, and know too within that freedom, it's kind of well, it's exactly what you feel like doing. So what I mean like by that and why that is so important is that um, there are so many decisions and there's so many unique paths, and you can choose to have a very volatile life, or you can choose to live very peacefully and have your life be very easy for you. And again, this is hard to wrap your mind around, especially when you have such programming to live a certain type of life. So anything, and that's where it's so helpful to take some time just to observe. Just take some time to observe, and even write down things that happen, because what I want you to understand is as you start to have that log, as you start to have that record of what's going on. And I'm reminded of like Phineas and Ferb. I don't know if anyone ever watched that cartoon, um, but I want to say it's Ferb. It's the tall, skinny one. Uh, he has this record of everything that happens to the minute and the second. So like every so often they'll be like, okay, Ferb, well, what did happen at 2:72 on Thursday the 13th? Uh, and he'll like pull out his notebook and right here it says exactly this, right? And it doesn't need to be that strong, right? You'd spend all your time recording things. But when you have an example or have an experience or a situation that seems noteworthy, definitely consider noting it. Especially if you're wanting to get better at manifestation, tracking your manifestations, I highly recommend. That is a way to, give your ego mind solid proof, a solid record that what you are doing in these esoteric realms is working. What you are doing with your spiritual practice is working incredibly well. So that was a quick tangent. Okay. So I want to give you a metaphor, and this metaphor is akin to when we're dreaming at night. And when you are dreaming, you pretty well go into a different dimension. You have a different awareness. Sometimes you can be in a different vessel, a different body. Those around you can be metaphors or picked up in other ways where they appear differently. And so, a good example of that, I had a dream, and my cat Monkey is, a fairly small cat relatively. And we got in the car, and inside the car, like, because like Monkey comes with me just about everywhere. And in this other realm, in this dream world, he was a giant panther. He was like larger than life. He took up the whole size of the car. And I remember um, we were in there, and part of the message was like, I needed a bigger car so that Monkey could fit. And like Monkey as a panther, right? As a giant, enormous panther. And I want you to understand too, you can have many different realms that you go into in this dream state. And what's so important about understanding that is because the idea, that city of shrinking yourself into the size of a proton, is really just a way for your conscious mind to understand that you are going to basically set your body down, set your body to sleep, set your ego to sleep while your soul wanders off and goes into these other dimensions and goes into these other experiences, sometimes very, very far away. And this is often called astral projection. There's many different kind of names and um, types within that as a whole, right? And it's it's so important to understand the purpose behind why you're doing what you're doing and what the importance is, because when you get into those other realms, it can be disorienting. Oftentimes you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are anymore. You have this faint connection with your body in this other realm, which would be here, me, Alicia, on Earth. Uh, but simultaneously, you have all of these different versions of you out there in other, and I want to say time zones, but it's not typically how we think of, human time zones. But it's as if you had like a snap of the entire universe and all of our awareness here, and then another one in the 1920s and all of the awareness there, and another one in the 3000s and all of our awareness there. But then you expanded that and you had one for every single time that ever has existed in any possible way. Right now, a lot of our science still believes that time is linear, and I would love to encourage you to consider that it is not. And the reason that that is important is that is what can allow you to pull in some of these expertises from different past lives or even future lives for that matter. And so what's really helpful with this is oftentimes you want to project into the future so that that future version of you can give you advice to your current version. And this is helpful because we also then start to realize that there's multiple versions of us. So you almost want to ask yourself, which one's the highest and best possible good? And that's the version that I want to know how they got to where they are and what they did and what choices they made to have what I am desiring, right? And so we call that manifestation on a very rudimentary term. And I know that manifestation is like such a buzzword right now. So I just want to give you guys a couple notes about it because manifestation is occurring all the time, sort of like breathing, right? Whatever you have, whenever you look around, your entire external world, you have manifested in some form, even if it was completely unconscious. So some people want to go sit down and manifest. Okay, I am manifesting. I am journaling. I am, envisioning. I am creating my vision board. I am mentally attuning to that energy. And then they wander off and they think it ends, right? But you are actively manifesting all of the time, whether it is conscious or not. And the reason it's important to understand this is that in these higher dimensions, you are actively everything all the time, all at once. And the same way that in our place here on earth, we don't think about breathing, we don't think about digesting, we don't think about, I'm sure there's not a Joe, well, if there is a Joe Schmo somewhere, we don't think about him very much, and we definitely don't think of like that version of someone with another name in another country somewhere on the other side of the world. And to then think about like the idea of countries themselves, right? These are human created ideals and boundaries and limitations on ourselves. And so it's important to understand that every single limitation that you are that you have a boundary with, you at some level agree to that and create that for yourself, okay? And so I'm feeling like we need to give some examples. Okay, I'm just gonna say some things and I want you to kind of feel in your body how that makes you feel. Okay. So, and these are kind of pertinent to where I live and my culture and kind of hot topics right now that I'm aware of. So just use these as examples, right? Because you're going to have different ones that are unique to you and unique to your situation. So some of the, and I'm going to try and give you like multiple examples in pairs so that you can understand how they feel different energetically, right? So the first one we're going to talk about is the boundary between Mexico and the US, the United States of America. And there's, in my view, like a lot of turmoil around that. They're thought of as very different cultures. And there's a lot of like, I would call it warring over that border, over that boundary. Shift that line over. What about the border between the US and Canada? That feels very different. Eh? Tim Hortons versus Starbucks. It's age old war we've got there on the coffee front. And then, from my perspective too, like I start to think of like, well, what's on the southern side of Mexico, or even the border between Alaska and Canada, right? I'm pretty sure that's just like a bunch of tundra and some mooses and bears. I honestly don't know, but I don't think anyone is giving a shit about that boundary. And I'm sure there's someone out there that does, but across the board, no, right? And so, like, I just traveled to Iceland, right? It's an island. The boundary is the island, right? It's a geographic boundary that's pretty well there, right? But when it's just kind of an arbitrary line through a rural area, is it 5 feet that way? Is it 10 feet that way? I don't know. So kind of moving on to our next one, I was saying about the United States of America as I was saying it. And I feel like depending on where you're from, you say it differently, right? In some places, it's the states. In some places, if you say America, that means North and South America as a whole. It's like all two continents, right? Or if I were to say America, people would know I'm talking about the US for the most part, where I'm from. US, USA, United States, these states, America. There's a bunch of different names, right? And then I might say the West Coast, right? That's a pretty specific boundary where I live. But you start to think about it, and different people have different views. Like right off the bat, if you do not live in the United States, the West Coast is a very different place. Secondly, let's condense this boundary down. If you do live in the US, depending on who you ask, the West Coast is very different. Some people think it's anything west of the Mississippi. Let me tell you, that's not on the coast, okay? If there's no coast there, you're not on the West Coast. Duh. But then there's kind of like this gray area. Some people count Idaho and Utah and, Nevada is kind of southwest in my mind. Whatever, right? And so then it starts to get very arbitrary. Anyone you ask can have a different view of what it is. And this is why that sovereignty is so important, and knowing your own, not only knowing your own identity, but knowing also how you identify other people, places, things, times, all of this, right? Because if you start to think about different decades, uh, depending on where you're at around the world alone, and we're just trying to like focus this so that we can understand it to the world. You can speak to different times, and in different places they have very different histories. So a peaceful time in your culture could be a highly turbulent, violent time in another culture. And so all of a sudden, we really have to be cognizant of our own views and also the views of who we might be interacting with. Because when you, so kind of blowing it up again, once we go into, I should say, expanding it, once we go into another time frame, the inherent view that we're absorbing, right? So in order to be in that other time frame, we need to align with the energy of that time frame. And this also works for space, but we're just talking about time right now. And then I want you to start to understand that these intersect somewhere. So, the way that we are able to move between dimensions is by saying, I'm at this time and space, and I want to be at this time and space. And keep in mind, this only works in the field that we live in. Once you get outside of time and space fields, you just instantly think of it and you are there. There is no time, so it's this instantaneous energy. And that's also why you have to understand your own power, right? You are so powerful, and if you don't believe that you are powerful, then it really seems like this storm is just pushing you around, right? That's where you want to hone in on that power and say that I am here. This is where I am. All my pieces are here and my pieces are staying together. And if you've had experiences, even just kind of dipping your toe into this, you'll start to better understand what I mean by that. And so if you haven't had those yet, you're preparing. If you're listening to this, you are totally preparing. That's the only reason you would come into this realm, into this video to watch it. And so, right, going between different times and places, you want to embody the energy of that place. And in order to do that, you really need to, just like we talked earlier, like put your own self to sleep and then wake up as a different version of yourself in another place. And if you think of this, this is what you're doing when you're dreaming. You very seriously are putting your own physical body to sleep, sure. But part of the reason we live in this realm is to practice this, is to get better at this, is to learn things, right? To expand in certain ways. And so we are able to have the safety of continually waking up in the same body as long as we choose to. And that safety is what allows us to explore more. So excited about that. Okay, so I do want to make sure that we get everything covered. I'm hearing it's time to move on from this subject. There's something new, and she wants to talk about me and about some of the things that I do and how I am able to do this. Okay, so yeah, manifestation is our buzzword. So they're saying that that's like something that's very relatable right now, and so we're going to kind of focus there. And in order to, my identity is vague, right? I really identify. I identify by my name. I identify by where I was born. I identify by when I was born. I identify to the country and the culture that I was born into like I guess I would call it ethnic background. Like I'm white as hell, but that's, my ethnicity, my race, you could say. And again, those are not always the same. So we'll just add another one there. And I want you to know that those don't always line up either. So if you're someone who has been adopted, or maybe you're a refugee, you can have a very unique background of how you identify. And this goes back into that myriad of permutations. There's unlimited identities. There are limitless possibilities to who you can be and what kind of starting point your physical body can have here on Earth, right? And so, like, I'm a big fan of DVF, Diane von Furstenberg. I got her book around here somewhere, but she fascinates me. So she was in the womb during Nazi Germany as a Jewish person. Her mom was Jewish. Well, I guess both of her parents were, but they were separated. And um, and you can see these pictures. It's phenomenal. She just has a phenomenal story to me. She ended up marrying a prince. I can't remember the country. It's like a small Eastern European country. I want to say something like Austria. Please go look it up. That's not exact, I'm sure. And she ended up divorcing him and going on to become one of the most famous, I would say, fashion designers around the world. She invented the wrap dress in the 1970s and continues to be a fashion icon in my mind. And so, if at any point in her life she chose to limit herself to her current reality, she would have, where she was born, been limited to being a person who is persecuted at its very least. A person in poverty, a person imprisoned, a person likely to have a very negative future. So she ends up marrying a prince. What? Oh my God. So now all of a sudden she's like royalty by marriage. And I think part of what I love about this story is I think so often in my culture, in America, in the United States, I grew up watching all these Disney movies that told you should be pretty and marry rich royalty. You should go be a princess. And like, they don't even have to be rich. It's just kind of assumed that they are, right? So, if she had just stayed in that, she may never have gone on to like become this worldwide phenomenon. And again, like, people, if you don't give a shit about fashion, you probably have no idea who DVF is. But like, even if you just watch The Hills, like, she's on there. She's Whitney goes and works for her fashion company. And like, there's so many different realms where there's going to be people watching this who have no idea what I'm talking about. And that is the beauty of it, right? Within our very earthly realm, we have this history that is existing somewhere, and we have no reality of it. And so to like put that in a different perspective, if you told me a bunch of athletes' names, I'd probably be like, did we go to high school with him? Who is that guy? I don't know. And you could start to talk about how this is the best basketball player of 1995. Be like, Michael Jordan? I don't know. I know some buzz names, but like, if you started talking about cricket, no fucking clue. Not at all. And similarly, some people are like botanists and really into plants. I'm just kind of like picking things in my space. Some people might be really into photography or into home decor and interior design, landscape architecture, oracle cards, water. Like, there's so many different, and these are just the things around my house, music, yoga, gods and goddesses, and vision boards and manifestation. These are all things that are in my immediate realm. But then if you start to think beyond that, there are seriously unlimited things that I have no conscious awareness of. And that's what I want you to really understand is to embody this awareness that there are things that you do not know about at all. that you do not know they exist, you don't know how they work, nothing, not a thing, right? Because that's the energy that you want to embody to be able to go into some of these far-reaching dimensions. If you think that you know all about everything, then you're only going to know about the things you already know about. So you want to embody this energy of curiosity, this energy of allowing yourself to experience things that you haven't seen before, right? And so if you are on that manifestation journey, and if you are trying to kind of make some of those bigger quantum leaps, what I really encourage you to do is do new things as you want to do them, right? So if you, and I love doing this with shopping, I love fashion so much, I love shopping. And so if I see like a new designer and I'm like, oh my God, love that, love it, I'm gonna try out that new designer, okay? But if I also, I don't like, okay, so we just went snorkeling in Iceland, and that was a very new experience for me. And it was very cool. It's very, very cool. It was so cool. It was cold. Freaking cold. Uh, but in doing these new experiences, you are telling your conscious mind, you're telling your human self that there are new things to go experience. There are different ways that you can live. There are different things that you can do. And it's so important to expand into those new things, because that's what then gives you that programming that it is safe to do new things. It is safe to change. It is safe to be different from the baseline that you have. And I want to talk about that programming, because when I first heard that word, I was like offended, honestly. I was like, excuse you, I don't have programming. Huh. Um, and, the person who said it to me was talking about it very negatively. I will say that. But what I want you to understand is you can kind of like use some synonyms for that. So these would be your unconscious habits. These would be your unconscious beliefs. These would be your unconscious identities, right? And so it's helpful to understand how you identify, because that's what gives you the power to change your identities. And an example, okay, a great example. And I'm going to give you a couple because we're going to get kind of out there, right? So the first example is if I believed that I wasn't a very athletic person. I'm just not an athletic person, can't do athletic things. And then I wanted to go be like a dancer or like an aerial person in the circus. I wanted to go be an acrobat. Well, I could not be an acrobat and believe that I'm not an athletic person, because an acrobat is inherently an athletic person, right? And so if I did want to go be an acrobat, I would have to shift my thinking about my own athleticism. And this, go listen to some of Esther Hicks stuff. I'm a big fan. She talks about basically like it's so much harder to shift a belief into something positive. It is much easier just to quiet the negative. Okay. And so what I mean by that is instead of going around and trying to tell yourself that you're this big old acrobat and you're so athletic and blah, 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 while you're like sitting on the couch eating chips, okay, that doesn't align. It's really hard for you to believe that because you're not acting like it. What's a lot easier is for you to believe that you're not athletic. And then that allows this neutrality to come into place where you can start acting like an athletic person. And the more that you use that new pattern, the more that you use that new behavior, pretty soon you're in a place where you believe that you could be an athletic person. And then you keep working out and you advance and you start practicing circus skills and blah, 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 maybe you apply for a job with Cirque du Soleil, I don't know, and you start to believe by doing this stuff that you are actually an athletic person. And then that belief aligns with the belief that you could be an acrobat. And all of a sudden it's like, it's gravy, right? That's the sweet spot, is when all your identities, all your beliefs line up. And then that's when that new version of you can occur. So you actually need to kind of shift some of these internal beliefs before you can shift into a new version of you. In this example, that is an acrobat, right? So our next example is if, because we've been talking about Lolita a little bit, definitely go back and watch that episode. I like it a lot. And so if I think if we go as far as like believe I'm a hummingbird, that's like a little too much. I don't think I could even believe that now, but on a theoretical level, I know that that is possible. So I think that's what's so cool about this example, right? So let's start with like if I just believed I could fly. And I'm getting like Peter Pan vibes here for sure. But if I believed I could fly, I would need to believe that I was weightless. And in order to be weightless, I am very light. I don't carry energy. I don't carry baggage with me. And you can start to see how you can shift in that way. And there's this magicness to it, right? Because then we go and think about the Wright brothers, who invented the first planes, to my knowledge, or at least in the history that I was taught. We get into this area, and this is a great example of programming, right? It is programmed for me to believe that the Wright brothers made the first planes. They were the first people to fly. Well, that's only here on Earth in my culture and my belief. There could very well have been someone else on the other side of the world that was also building planes, and I have no awareness of that because the story I learned was the very like white Americanized version that the Wright brothers developed this, right? Right. Uh, and, okay, I see it. I see it. So, part of what we're talking about here too is what I would call right-mindedness, and right timing goes alongside that. And what I mean by right-mindedness is having these neutral, open beliefs in being a beginner. Because okay, that's cool. That's cool. So it's not necessarily about turning into a hummingbird so you can flap your wings and fly. It's about shifting all of the things around you, the external environment, so that who you already are naturally floats. Okay, so an easy kind of low-hanging fruit there is if gravity no longer existed. That is a way that we could shift our external environment and we would be able to fly just naturally, right? You can also start to think of like skydiving, and being in spacecrafts or flight crafts or things like that. This is where I want to remind you that some of those dimensions are so vastly different, right? So there's whole dimensions that are just water-based. There's whole dimensions that are, only air, only rocks, or like plasma, like almost like you think of the sun. And that's a fun reminder to mention. So part of the reason Moonchild said her name was Moonchild, she's cute. She has like a very flirty, coy personality. And in her energy, she kind of comes and goes in spurts because she says, we operate at such different frequencies that I am not prepared to be aware of her all the time, or else, like, I just can't handle it. It's overwhelming, and it's actually destructive to my learning and my being and my ability to channel her, right? So, uh, she, the way she introduced herself to me was kind of through a question. And I love questions. I love questions so much. I highly encourage you to ask yourself more questions. So the question was, I guess it was more of a statement about perspective. I was starting to think about perspective. I was starting to think about, these other dimensions and how these things work and traveling between them and whatnot. And she asked me about just a different perspective. And it was that from the sun's perspective, the moon is always full. And so when you start to think about that, like the moon, and she said, with the except when it's not there, right? And so that would be when it's behind other planets. And if you think about, from Earth's perspective, we see the cycles of the moon because that's where the sun is reflecting. But from the sun's perspective, the moon is always getting a full shine, right? It never sees the dark side of the moon because it's always seeing. And even then, right? So isn't the dark side of the moon the side that's not shown to Earth? It's not actually the part that's dark, right? Because there's parts that are dark that we can still see. And it's only, dark by human perspective, or by the perspective of where we are on Earth as we rotate around, right? So a big part of this is understanding where your perspective is, and that includes, those beliefs we talked about, that includes those identifiers we talked about. And you, as much as you are born into some of those, and those are told to you and taught to you as a child, you get to a point where you can choose to continue to believe those or to make changes, right? And that is so special because even if you just take this perspective of so many of us feel that we are restricted to our human bodies. We are human people with human brains, and that is all that we are aware of. But that's really not true. We are soul beings in human bodies. And the easiest way to see that is when you dream. When you dream, you're not in your body. You're in other dimensions and not in your body anymore. And so you can be in these other places and still be a version of you, even though you don't have your body with you. So it's so important to just open up that lens and to realize that you are a lot more than the physical person that you see in the mirror. That's where mirrors also act as portals a lot of the time, and we'll talk more about that in a different session. But when you look at yourself in the mirror, you can do this exercise where you trade places. And what I mean by that is you can look at yourself and say, okay, this is a completely identical version of me. And then you can say, well, I'd really like to change this or change that. And I encourage you to get much more spiritual about this. And, maybe you want a nose job. Great, whatever. But let's say you want to be more forgiving, or you want to release some grief that you are holding, or you want to feel more empowered, or more sovereign, or more peaceful. And it's so much more special to think about some of these qualities than it is to really think about your physical self. Because even if you say you really want a nose job, that's probably rooted in some idea that like your nose is ugly or it needs to be fixed in some way. And whoever you are, if you are feeling like you need to be fixed in some way, I encourage you to drop that belief, because there are no mistakes in nature. You are very much so a part of nature, and I think that's pretty easy to agree upon. And I just hope that you know that you are absolutely whole and perfect the way that you are, and perfect in that broader sense that you are inherently, innately perfect. And that is just so exciting to me. And I hope it's exciting to you. And I hope this session has helped to kind of set the stage for some of the interdimensional work that we'll be talking about moving forward. So certainly if you want to explore some of those areas, just kind of hitting those key points, right? Really know your identity, know yourself, and also embody that neutrality, embody that energy of there is something new out there, there's something different out there that I can learn. And be really open to that. Also very decisively choose to be things like, and these are your own choices, choose to be things like peaceful, safe. I like kind. I like to be kind. But you can really choose anything. And so that's where a lot of the power is, right? Because if you choose to be, and power is interesting all in itself, right? Because that term can have so many different perspectives depending on who you ask. And so I want you to be a version of powerful where you have such sovereignty over yourself, your own body, your own soul, all the parts of you that are you, right? We're not trying to go conquer the world. That's a different type of power. That's not the style of power that I'm talking about. And know that all of these, beings that I channel, that I talk to, I somehow have some connection with in some way, whether that is space, right? Lolita and I live in the same space. We're neighbors. We live in the same time. We interact in those ways. But even, yeah, I think we'll leave it there today. We're right about time. And so Moonchild just wants to leave us with this message of love and gratitude. She definitely wants to remind you, if you are feeling those energies come in, really enjoy them, love them, appreciate them, because they have their own unique messages for you. You have your own path, you have your own purpose, even if you don't consciously understand it in this humanistic world. You are that soul level, and there's so much more. And I know you guys can probably see Monkey. He sees the spirits too. That's why I appreciate him so much. He really helps to validate me, help to validate some of these things, these experiences that I have. And, I encourage you to make connections, make friends that can help to validate those experiences for you as well. All right, so lots of love, everybody. Let's run through. So if you want to join our live version on third Wednesdays, 6 to 7 p.m. Pacific time. This month we're talking about intuitive skills. That'll be next Wednesday. I want to say it's the 13th. Let's check really fast. The 14th. Oh, just a couple days. Come on, get out of here. And I'll continue to record these and upload them. We'll probably start uploading them in advance, kind of bear with me as we go through these growing pains, growing expressions. They're not painful, they're growing expressions. And do look at roseco.co for other things that we're doing. We'll be at a psychic fair on the 17th and 18th in Portland, Oregon area called MeWe. So you can learn where to see me in person, and remember, everything I do can be done remotely. So even if you aren't in this area, don't hesitate to book a session either by phone or by Zoom. And I think that's all the housekeeping. So thank you so much for joining me and Moonchild, and more to come. Bye.